Welcome back to Crosstabs. This is Reagan Canope. You're listening to part 2 of our interview with John Horvick. He's a pollster from DHM Research. We hope you enjoy this episode.
We're clear to engage. Time on target. 5 mics. Out.
I have this question, and because I haven't been able to find any Oregon numbers on Israel war. Did you guys ask anything about that in your surveys, or is it just not?
We haven't asked about it. I just haven't. I mean, I think I think it is shaping how people think about national politics. I really don't think it's making much difference on people thinking about state and local politics. I'm curious about it, but I'm also doubtful enough that if you're a Democrat who's sort of frustrated with Biden's proposal, you're going to still vote for a Democrat for your state legislator. And maybe I should go measure it and find out, but I haven't asked about it much.
Is that so? Does the national stuff, and this is kind of, we can start segueing in the presidential debate, I think is probably where we can end it on having a discussion about that. But I think like the national issues, like abortion, like, Gaza, the border, all those things that we heard on the presidential debate. How do you see that? Does it translate into states like Oregon, into elections and stuff? What do you see there from a polling?
I think so. If we ask about abortion, for example, it's not the top issue in voters' minds. It's not, I don't think, how it's affecting most of their votes. I do think it played a big role in 2022 in the gubernatorial election. It was a motivating factor for Democrats to get out and vote for Kotek at a time when they were pretty depressed about things in the state and feeling about how sort of policy in the state that allowed the conversation for Tina Kotek to be not about homelessness, for example, or not about crime. And so, I don't think it's the most important issue for them, but Democrats are so, and Republicans too, are lined up on their sides. So the fact that it's salient, it's an issue that can hold coalitions together. I think that's probably different than, say, Israel, Gaza, but abortion is in that category.
What is there anything that's like, I guess, like abortion? You said it played in the governor's race, and I would say you're probably right. You had two people.
Guns would be another one, and the governor's race. I don't think gun control is like the key issue that Oregonians really are concerned about. But Democrats, it's for both Democrats and Republicans, it's one of these you have to be on the right side of. And so if the election in 2022, if the election could be about guns, and that was sort of like a dig against Betsy Johnson more than probably Christine Drazan or abortion, it allowed Democrats to pivot away from those issues that that Oregonians were most what they said that they cared most about. So it became a voting issue because it helped focus what the campaigns were about.
Do you think, like in the governor's race, because I was looking at some numbers and I thought it was kind of interesting, the last 3 governor races all got almost identical Republicans. Almost got identical the percentage, like 43.5%.
Yep.
And I think so that was New Buehler, Christine Drazan, and then the special election, which was
Bud Pierce.
Yeah, thanks. And then and you go back to where Dudley got 47% or so of the vote. So that was the last one there. Like, and I guess Dennis Richardson was like 44% or something, but really those last 4 are right around that 43.5. Is that our ceiling now, do you think, statewide? Is that ceiling?
It's the ceiling today, and those last 3 gubernatorial elections is the same set of counties. So there hasn't been a county that's changed now for 3 cycles. It's the ceiling for right now. If you just go back and, like, I have these I'm not sure if you're GIF or GIF people, but like I have this GIF of like all the county maps or the last century, and you see the colors change over the election cycles, and there's real periods of stability, and then there's big changes really quickly. So I mean, I don't know what the future is going to hold, but we are sort of locked into this right now. We're locked into it. This is my point earlier. We're locked into this like 4% margin. But if underneath that, there's huge changes. right? Look at Washington County. I mean, Washington County was a red county not too long ago. It was basically divided 20 years ago, and now it's an overwhelmingly blue county. Well, the overall margin hasn't changed very much, which means there's other parts of the state that are getting redder. So, and this is sort of back to the beginning of the urban rural divide that, where that maybe it's a 4 point margin between D's and R's in statewide races, gubernatorial races, maybe it's 5, maybe it's 3, pick your number. But that doesn't mean that underneath the surface that things are stable. They're quite dynamic, and it's this we're just moving apart at sort of at equal speeds with equal force.
It does fascinate me that you can have this 4% margin with, I would say you could arguably say 3 wildly different, Republican governor candidates and Democrat candidates, and yet they end up with the same result with this, issue set that's just completely changing all the time. It's amazing.
I also have this question about, because Oregon is sort of, you're pointing out, it's 4 points isn't really it's not a big margin, but it seems to be a what you'd call it probably inelastic, in the sense that it doesn't seem to change, and reasons could abound. But I'm looking at morning consults, and I'll throw this into the Zoom chat so you guys can see the same thing I'm seeing real quick. But I'm looking at morning consult. They have their Biden approval ratings by a state, but it shows Biden's approval in Washington is +1.
Mm-hmm.
His approval rating in California is +8, and in Oregon it's -11. And one of the things that have always fascinated me is Oregon is cast as such a solidly blue state, but it seems to be the least blue, or the least Biden friendly state. What do you think represents for that shift? I mean, he's not like overwhelmingly approval in Washington, but still positive in California, still positive, in New York and Maryland and Massachusetts. But in Oregon, it's like -11. Like what's
The
that
first thing
about?
that comes to my mind is that Oregon is the least racially diverse of the 3 states you just mentioned, and
Oh, interesting.
Biden he's certainly eroded support among folks of color, but still more supported there than among white voters. So that would be one thing they would look. I don't know. I should know what the level of college attainment is in Washington State, but I'm pretty sure it's higher than Oregon, and that'd be another demographic group where particularly college educated whites that's really the Democratic base right now. And so my guess is that would be the other, those would be the 2 sort of demographic factors that would play into that.
Republicans sure have gotten the voters who take a shower after work compared to the people who take a shower before work. And it seems to be, so the white collar, blue collar thing, it really feels like Trump has really pulled a lot of those people that shower after work. And Biden has completely grabbed everybody that showers before work, which is your education. And education seems to be, like last election cycle, I would look at your polling, John, and I'd look at other people's polling and I was like, education attainment was like the dividing line.
One of my favorite charts, I've talked to, I think, Reagan about this before, and I certainly have shared it in my Twitter account, but I think it's really powerful, is if you look at the Oregon House of Representatives. So in Oregon, about 36% of adults have a college degree. So if you look at districts where 36% or more of the constituents in that district have a college degree, Democrats hold every single one of those districts. And Republicans hold most of the districts with less than that level of college education. If you knew nothing else about a district with the level of college education, you can almost make a perfect prediction on whether or not that seat will be held by a Democratic or Republican. It is the most predictive variable we have right now on whether or not someone's going to be a Democrat or Republican. It's really striking, and it's striking for lots of reasons. One, just the political math, you can sort of figure things out. But if you spend any time talking to an upper educated, Democrat, the constellation of issues that they care about is different. The language that they use is different, and so it's economics, but it's so cultural that divide is, and you can see why if you represent a district that has 60-70% of your constituents have a college degree, you're going to be focused on different issues and talk about things in a different way than a district that 18-19% of folks have a college degree.
Yeah. Well, also those people are probably your peers, right, on some level, and they're the ones you talked earlier. You go down to the bar, you're hanging out, having a pint. You're talking about different issue sets than
absolutely. So my clients are a lot of like, government policymakers, whether elected officials or sort of department heads or, sort of C-suite people. And I do try to remind them, like, everybody in this, when I'm talking to them, everybody in this room has a college degree.
Mm-hmm.
Most of your friends, probably all your friends that you hang out with, have college degrees. And we are the minority of Oregonians. Like, we take for granted, I think, people in positions of power, that they are representative of the state, at least on educational attainment and how that associates with politics. And it's just not. I mean, overwhelming, the vast majority of Oregonians, the strong majority of Oregonians don't have a college degree, but the vast majority of those who are making decisions do. And culturally, economically, politically, these are just different groups of
I
people.
see it. I mean, I have a master's degree, and I'm a very rare find in Crook County to have a master's degree living in Crook County. But I wasn't born here, right? I think there's a vast, and a lot of the kids that my son just graduated high school, and he's going off to Grand Canyon University down in Phoenix, and
Mhm.
I wasn't sure he was going to go to college. He didn't want to a couple of years ago because most of his peers aren't. A lot of them going to trades and other things. They're just not go. And I think it's because their parents don't have degrees, so it is a kind of a perpetuating cycle. But I think my son is seen. One, he saw the campus, and that's where all the girls are, is what I told him. That's why he go to college. But I think but also he's seeing that, hey, there's a level of attainment that I want to get to, financially, or all those sort of things. And I think as you grow up, you start to see that stuff. That's what made me. My parents didn't have college degrees at all. My dad didn't even finish 8th grade. So, but for me, I saw it as a way out. Right, a way out was to educate myself. And I don't know how we're doing that in schools these days. But luckily enough, I think I was able to teach my kid and show him and just say, hey, there's nothing wrong with being an electrician. I mean, some of those guys are killing it. And they're doing just fine. But it's like, do you want to do that the rest of your life?
I don't know what the right level of college attainment is, and I don't know what the right interest is for a high school student to go to college. What I do know is that there's been a collapse of interest in college among Republican-leaning high school students.
Hmm.
And so we have this sort of trend now with the politics of education and partisanship, and it does feel like probably more at the beginning of this trend than the end. Particularly when you look at what young people are interested in, what young sort of Republican teenagers and young adults are interested in pursuing higher education.
I was going to say that my brother-in-law is an electrician, but he is a union electrician, and he's working on getting a couple different licenses. He has one that lets him be a foreman, I think, and then there's another one that'll let him work on just, gigantic power stations and stuff like that. And so there's still sort of embedded in different these different trades higher levels of attainment, and it requires him to do schooling. He went to 5 years to get whatever license it is that he's got now, I think, and it was a lot of effort and a lot of actual like hard schooling. And so it's there's opportunities to still advance in these. And I think that's one of the other things too. You look at, you can be an electrician, but you're also, I mean, obviously with the push for green energy, there's going to be a lot more electricians needed. I heard that in the legislature, certainly the workforce issue, and not just electricians that can do basics, but they can do more complicated stuff. And so it's kind of interesting. I would be interested to see if the people in those fields, and I'm sure this isn't something that a lot of people have asked questions on, but people in those fields who've gotten those higher levels of attainment, if their politics stay the same or not.
Oh,
I think that
that's
would be
interesting. It makes me
fascinating.
also think maybe we're measuring education wrong too in some of these questions, because what you're describing we wouldn't really pick up in a survey, because like we
Mm-hmm.
have a college degree or not, right? And so
Yeah.
we're asking less about how much further education you have in something that's not a bachelor's or master's sort of program.
Right.
Hey, Reagan, do you? Of course, that was speaking of kids with cell phones. That was my son that called while we're sitting there.
Did he leave a
I turned
message,
my
Brian?
notifications off, Reagan. I mean, I thought I did a
Did,
good job on
did he leave
that.
a message, Brian, or?
No, of course not. My kids are the worst about leaving, and it drives me crazy because I don't. He probably wants, hey, Dad, where's the mayonnaise or something? I'm trying to make a sandwich. It's the craziest thing. Do you have any more? I want to just hop into the presidential debate thing before we let John go about his day and go start back on surveys. He's probably going to get back on the phones here pretty soon.
I was gonna say I wanted to point out that we're not gonna talk about this today, Brian. I think we're gonna dive deeper into this on the policy. I mean, we talked about homelessness and housing and stuff, but so the Supreme Court reversed the grants pass homelessness
Yep.
case. John, you tweeted some Portland data, and I wondered if you have that up front, because I think that's interesting to look at, because there's basically a state law that's gonna prevent what most people want, that Brian, you mentioned with House Bill 3115, I think, 3115.
Yeah, so the Supreme Court ruled today in the grants pass case, and with that in mind, we DHM had done a survey with the Oregonian in April, so sort of in the lead up to the primary election. This was a Portland Metro resident, so it's not statewide and it's not grants pass, but it's also the part of the state we might think is the most sympathetic to those who are living on the streets. But the question was, what's closer to your opinion about homelessness in the Portland metro area? One option was local government should be allowed to ban people from camping in public spaces and fine or arrest anybody who refuses to leave. I would underline the fine or arrest. We did try emphasizing the question that there are consequences. This isn't just something in the abstract, that people could be held, like, their freedom could be put into question. And then the other option was, if there's not enough shelter space, people who are homeless should have a legal right to camp in public spaces. So again, Portland metro area, and it's not even close. It's 63% say that government should be allowed to ban people from camping, and 27% say that folks who are homeless have a right to camp in public spaces if there's not shelter. So even in the most liberal sort of community in Oregon, this wasn't for voters isn't a difficult sort of policy question for them. Now, there's a lot of follow-up questions you could ask about that. What should the penalties actually be? Do you really want to put somebody in jail versus a fine? How big the fines? If they are second offenders, how do you what? There's another order of questions which could change people's opinions about it.
Yeah, they're not.
And this is kind of my point that I started on earlier. And again, I don't know what the right answer is, and it's not my place as the pollster in this conversation to give the right answer. But people in the region, and we can imagine what these results will be statewide, are really clear in how they're thinking about these issues, and how they're thinking about them hasn't aligned with where I think policymakers have been. Now, policymakers may be right, the voters might be wrong, but there is a mismatch between the two.
I got my other question. Oh, go ahead, Brian.
Solution. Hold on. Solution to homelessness. Are you ready for it? Bus tickets. You want to go now south, or do you want to go north on I-5? Because I just don't think you can solve it. We can throw billions at it. You're not going to solve it. I think it's just pretty difficult. But I think moving them along is, because there's so many transients in that group. I don't even know the number, but I think that's the reality.
TriMet's excited, Brian. They're going to have a bunch of new riders under the Brian Iverson plan.
At least they'd have some riders.
My other question for you, John, was sort of, well, I'd sent you this. There was this YouGov survey, and it's sort of, I found it to be quite hilarious. They asked, of the two presidential candidates, or both equally, which of the following do you think would? And then they put all these different scenarios and give better relationship advice. 44% said Biden, 21% said Trump. I could take a guess at that. Give better financial advice. 31% Biden, 47% Donald Trump. Win an arm wrestling competition. 52% of voters think Trump over Biden. And then win against the other at trivia. 37% Trump, 30% Biden. I loved this because it reminded me, I used to listen to the 538 podcast, and when they had Nate Silver there, and they would ask a good use of polling, bad use of polling, and I can imagine they must have covered this probably in their podcast, if it was still going. It might still be going, but I don't listen because Nate's not there anymore, because I'm too much of a fanboy. But I loved this polling, and it made me ask. You can react to that, but my broader question is, when you read surveys, are there mistakes that you see that other pollsters are making that you feel like are obvious pollster mistakes, or is there just so many different styles of how you can ask, because it's a science with an art kind of sort of combined to it, that you can't, it's hard to make certain mistakes, or you don't see mistakes as much as different styles.
Well, more the latter. I mean, there's a lot of arguments about like what's the right way to do a poll, what's the right way to contact people, what's the profile of the people you talk to. Like like we would have to have a whole nother conversation around that, but people really should be paying attention if they're going to follow polls closely, to not just look at the top line number, but look to see how things were done. There is, I think, like if people who like to talk about debates or talk about polling, with issue polling, meaning like not you're going to vote for Biden or Trump, but like how do you feel about what's the proper way to deal with homelessness, for example, or whatever it might be. There are questions like that. You can ask things a million different ways and you can get different answers. I think that people who want to dismiss a result will dismiss the way that the question's being asked rather than being curious about what we can learn from the way that it was asked. It's probably true that if you ask things in different ways, you'll get different answers, but I think that usually that means we can illuminate parts of how people are thinking about an issue. I think the thing that you didn't ask this directly, but I'll say the thing that people most misunderstand about polls that are about politics or about campaigns is, I think, folks who have some familiarity with polling will say something like polling should not be biased or it should be objective or something like that. I think people that took one, sort of stats or methods or survey research class in college are taught to write a question a particular way, that it shouldn't be leading. And there's like, if you're doing something for the census, like, maybe that's right. But I think Reagan and Brian, you would agree, when you're writing questions or polls for a campaign or for a candidate, your goal is to persuade. Your goal is to figure out how we can motivate people with a particular way to say something or phrase something. It is going to be leading. It is going to be incomplete information. It's going to be talked about in a way that you think is going to be most impactful for what you're trying to do. And pollsters aren't very good about communicating to the public about what their objectives are with the survey, and sometimes we're really coy about that. But I think pollsters should be more, when we're talking to the public, be upfront. Like, our goal is to figure out, if we talk about a thing a particular way, what sort of impact will that will have. And I'm not trying to be objective when I'm writing a question that way. I'm trying to figure out, if I frame an argument with a particular point of view, is that motivating for folks? I think that sometimes pollsters feel defensive about that, and I just, like, when they're getting pushback from people asking about it, I think that'd be the thing that I would say, is that we want to learn. If we talk about something some way, the way that we think is the best, is that going to be motivating for folks?
We're in the persuasion business. I mean, that's our job, right? Is to persuade people, make people think the way we think, right? Or on an issue, and how best do I do that? That's kind of the idea. Hey, so the debate, let's, because you're a pollster, like, there was clearly, these guys had a lot of polling and knew what they wanted to talk about. I'd love to get your take on what you saw from the debate from a polling standpoint, because I clearly, there was border, abortion, and international affairs, right? I mean, and the black vote, like, that seemed to be like, I don't know if I missed one, but it sure seemed
Biden's capability. I mean, so these are two very unpopular people. They're very unpopular presidential candidates. Americans do not want them as the nominees, right? More so on the Democratic side than the Republican side. Republicans are broadly happy with Trump as the candidate. Democrats not very happy with Biden as the candidate, but these are not the people that Americans want running. So that's sort of some context. The other context is that, Democrats will be frustrated that this is the case, but Americans do think that things were better, whether it's the economy or international affairs or just their satisfaction with their lives, were better during Trump's presidency than Biden's presidency. Now, Democrats will try to really get people focused on 2020. I just think that the polling and sort of our experience of the last 4 years is that people see 2020 as an outlier that Trump doesn't have a lot of responsibility for. And I'm not sure if they forgive him in that sort of sense, but they don't hold him accountable. Like they're not gonna like. There's a lot of Democrats who, like Chris Hayes in a show, is want to do this bit where are you better off than 4 years ago? And you'll talk about all of those happening in, say, June of 2020 or the summer of 2020. And the fact is, when people are thinking about, are you better off now or then, the then is not 2020. The then is 2019. And so I think with Trump, his real goal was to talk about, the economy was good when I was president. You felt really good about these issues when I was president, was immigration or crime or the economy, whatever. And Biden had a more difficult task insofar as he needed to convince people that things are better today, but that's not where people are starting from. 4 years ago, Biden said, that he was running because Trump was a threat, and his initial speech was about, or his sort of release video was about, being inspired to run because of the Charlottesville, and that's what got him going, and he was the man to beat Trump. And then he wanted to have this debate, I think, early on, because voters are very concerned about his age and his capabilities now, and imagining 4 years from now. And so this was a way to, I think, for a perception that he could get out in front of that or demonstrate to the public that he's capable. And it's hard to watch that debate and think that he didn't fail on the capability question. And then it becomes, well, if you're not capable, how can you be the person to beat Trump? And so I think on Biden's own terms, that he would have entered the debate, that he really failed last night. I mean, whether Trump did good or poorly is sort of irrelevant given the performance of Biden. But I think those are sort of the things that I was watching for last night, and sort of the lens at which I sort of think about the outcomes.
You didn't like his voice or down right here?
Yeah, no, he came. I mean, it was the very first sentence was, I think, to most people, it was striking. It's everything about his demeanor, his clarity of his answers, his facial expressions demonstrated his age.
I saw Jon Stewart making fun of his facial expressions when Trump was talking. I mean, it's like, for me, it's a little bit, it makes me a little bit sad, because I think that he is doing his best, and his best is just not what a politician in their prime is capable of doing, right? Like, and most people, even up to 65, 70, but they're both way past that. But Trump does not look as old as Biden does. And so it really becomes more of a problem for Biden than it does for Trump on the age point. And even, you compare him to Ronald Reagan, who got a ton of criticism for his age, but you look at clips of Reagan and you just do not see the same. Maybe his schedule was also tightly controlled towards the end. I don't know. I wasn't alive during his presidency, but my sense is that he came across much more energetic and much more effective as a communicator than Biden does at a similar age, or I think older.
I've watched lots of debates and heard punditry afterwards, and now I'm sort of playing this punditry hat and been frustrated. Like, why are you doing this theater criticism? Focus on, what are the policies and visions that these individuals have for the future. And I don't think that people tuned in at all last night. I mean, I don't think people were looking for or wanting or real desirous to hear what's the policy plan for these two people. They wanted to see whether or not they could perform, particularly whether or not Joe Biden could perform. And that's what Americans were watching for last night, was the performance, and to make a judgment on Biden and whether or not he could perform for another 4 years. And the first day after an event, it's easy to overinterpret things, but I think it's pretty clear that he failed on the terms that he set out for himself.
Well, and Brian, I've got some numbers here. You can make your point. I'm going to pull up some numbers here on how the debate performed.
Yeah, like the number of viewers.
Yeah,
like 48 million or something. But I think that, you're right. I think you were spot on there, John, talking about the two. What Trump didn't do, and Joe was trying to goad him with his one-line zingers the whole time, just trying to get him angry, right? And I think Trump I don't think he won the debate. I think Joe lost the debate.
Yeah, that's right.
Like by a large margin. And I think, to your point, like when I first just watched him shuffle out, I was like, wow, because my father-in-law, like, he's gotten one hip replaced. He's going in for the other one July 31st. He shuffles and he, doesn't walk and that's what I just saw. And then he started talking and you're just like, wow, this guy, he's even lost his timber. Like in his voice, there's just nothing. And then of course the rambling was, I didn't even, sometimes Vicky and I were sitting there watching it last night and I'm like, and then you hear Trump go, I don't even know what he said. Like it was so bad. The gaffes were so bad that and then the sad part was, I believe, because I agree with Reagan, I'm a little bit more sad. I'm also a little scared uh, for our country. I think that we have a commander in chief who's clearly not in charge. And that's the part that probably scares me. I mean, you talk about invoking the 25th. I mean, they should be doing that ASAP at this point, because there's no way that he's clearly got a command on what's happening every single day in the White House. And I think that Trump will he will mop the floor if the election were held today. And now I don't know what happens over the summer. This is such an early debate. We've never had one this early. I mean, they're not even the nominees of the party at this point. But I just was really, really blown away by how bad he did. I was expecting a little bit more like fire and brimstone, kind of like he did with the State of the Union. Yeah, but not there at all. So it was bad. Reagan, go ahead.
Just so I'm bipartisan this. I mean, I don't think Trump did himself any favors. Like to your point, Brian. I don't. His performance was not good by any measure. I mean, his answer.
I agree.
He didn't answer questions. He's a lot. If you read a transcript of his answers, you would think so many of them would be nonsensical. So just like I don't think voters walked away and think, man, that there's somebody who I think has real got a grip on things, and like voters were not impressed before the debate about Donald Trump. They're not going to be. I mean, broadly are not going to be impressed after the debate. But this debate won't be remembered because of him. It won't be remembered because of anything that he did or said. It's going to be remembered because of Biden's.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you, John. I think that Trump didn't really, because even I had some friends that are Republican, like he's not answering any of the questions. He kept going back to like, let me tell you about black people. Let me tell you about black people and illegals. And it was a little ad nauseum on stuff and some of the things. So I thought that was, I think you're right. I think he probably could have done a little better job. But Trump tends to not do well in his first debates, and then does better in second debates, I think. So I don't know, that we'll see if there is a second debate.
The other thing I think that was true, and then I'll get to the numbers, is I think that Trump was a very backwards looking, and I think that's sort of intentional, but I think there were people that were missing, like from both candidates a little bit, like what's the future going to be?
Yep.
Right. And what are you going to do? Because it doesn't seem like it's a switch that you can just flip to get us back to the 2019 economy. So you got to be more. I think he needs a little bit more to say, what am I going to do in the future? And Biden, too, what am I going to do to get the economy under control? Because I think a lot of people have felt like the response on that front has been limited. So the data is so let's go back to 2016, Clinton, Trump's first debate, 84 million viewers. Now, CNN says the 48 million viewership, not quite final numbers. They've got more data to get from streaming or something. But 84 million, then the second debate was 65 million, and the final Clinton-Trump debate, 71 million. And then Biden-Trump 2 years ago, they had two debates, 73 and 62. And the Harris-Pence debate got 57. So I do think having this in June, people are a little tuned out in the sense that like they're not ready to put their politics hat on yet. It's, summer vacation time. A lot of people are gone, all that kind of stuff. And so you've got numbers that are lower than the 2020 VP debate, which I think is a little bit like, what do you expect? And so
haters, I think the double haters is big.
Right. And then I also think from a Biden standpoint, they went in saying, we're just going to hopefully we'll be able to prove that he's up to the job. And now they've essentially done the reverse, which is wounded themselves by proving early in the campaign he may not be able to, or at least get so doubt on that front. And so the strategy of having this debate early seems to have sort of backfired on them a little bit.
That's like in the 24, less than that, almost, but 12 hours afterwards. We'll see how this plays out, but yes, that's broadly my take. But the other thing I'd say, just like in some of those previous debates, people were introduced to Trump for the first time, or introduced for Clinton as a presidential candidate for the first time. Like people know who Trump and Biden are. Like,
yeah, I hear that a lot.
You know
The
what
New
would
York
get really good
Times-
ratings, Reagan? I'm just
What's
gonna
that?
my final thoughts on the debate. A freaking golf match. I'm pay-per-view. I'm there. But they have to carry their own bag because that would be the key. Can they actually walk and carry their own bag 18 holes? Because now that gets a little iffy for Trump too, because he's a little bit of a larger guy himself.
Brian, that makes me think of George W. Bush, that clip that just constantly going around Twitter, and I retweet it every time I see it. He's looking at the press. He's wearing basically a shirt you're wearing now, Brian. He says, "We need to catch the terrorists. Now watch this drive."
Now watch this drive.
That's my favorite clip. I can't believe it's real, frankly, but I was a little kid when it happened. So
Yes.
I'm gonna read the 4 opinion columns on the New York Times this morning about the debate. God help us. 12 writers rate Biden's performance at the first presidential debate. All of them thought it was a draw or Trump won. Now, I don't know where they put those guys in the political spectrum, but it's New York Times. Joe Biden is a good man. Here's another one. And a good president. He must bow out of the race. And then the third one, Biden cannot go on like this. I'm looking at these opinions, and I'm going, well, the New York Times editorial board clearly has a view of how things should go. And this will be one of the most fascinating things to watch. I have never seen a political party debate in public so much whether their candidate for president, who is the current president, should be replaced on the ballot. That's new. And so from a sense of this is, one of these brand new situations that we haven't seen in a long time, or at least it's certainly in any of the current generations that are alive, it'll be fascinating to watch. But man, it seems like the logistics of doing that. I mean, you still have to fall back on, I think a lot of Democrats will fall back on, Biden's the only guy who's beaten Trump. Now he's only been done in 2 elections, but you sort of have their that's sort of their safety net. But now it feels like for a lot of them, they feel like their safety net has collapsed. And so it's sort of fascinating to watch that play out in such a public way.
It is, and I don't have any particular, I don't have any insight into how the National Democratic Party or what they're going to do or the insight into Joe Biden's mind. But if we look closer to home, we have very competitive congressional races in the 5th district here, and then across the river, the Glusenkamp-Perez seat, and I'd probably could throw Andrew Salinas' seat into that conversation as well, maybe even Val Hoyle's seat there. So like all these candidates are going to have to talk to the voters too about how they're thinking about the president, and people are motivated to vote or not vote, frankly, much more by a presidential race than anything else. And so how this affects who's going to turn out to vote could have impacts for our congressional elections here. So me as an Oregon pollster will probably focus more about how this impacts those sorts of races than decision making in DC.
Let's have you back maybe in September, and let's talk about that specifically, like what it's doing with those congressional races and turnout. And because I love your stuff on Twitter when you put historical turnouts in your GIFs or GIFs, however you say it. I guess I'm a GIF guy. But
Brian, it's good to know that we can continue doing the podcast, because if you pronounced it GIF, 11th episode was going to be our last one. It's very important to me, the pronunciation of GIF. John got it right. You got it right. It's a great episode,
all right.
Even if that's all that it was about. Well, thanks everybody.
John.
Thanks, John. You were so generous with your time. I'm going to do my best not to edit too much of this out and give people a long data episode, because you know what? Looking through the crosstabs, Brian, you know this, takes a long time to break down all that data. And so we brought John here to break down the data for us. And it took a little longer than the average episode. And I think that's okay. Don't forget to follow John Horvick at Horvick. And John, you'll let us know when that new poll is out, and then we'll share it with all of our listeners. Make sure to talk about it on the podcast. So yes, follow at Horvick on Twitter, at Brian G. Iverson on Twitter, at Reagan Knope on Twitter, and at Crosstabs FM on Twitter. Make sure to subscribe. Apparently, Brian, I've been listening to the episodes. I haven't even asked people to subscribe to the podcast. You should subscribe to the podcast. Download it. Rate it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Those are 2 of the biggest podcasts platforms out there. And so that really helps us get and find new listeners. Thanks so much.
Break the top 200, Reagan. Let's go.